So how many hours of school do you have during the day?
Like 1 to 2 hours.
Well, it depends, because like the layout I have is like I have all my teachers that don't give me a lot of homework on one day, and then on another day I have all my teachers that give me a lot of homework. So I'd say on like Tuesdays and Thursdays, like 1 hour, and then like Mondays and Wednesdays, like 2 or 3 hours.
Not 2-3 hours a day, less than that.
So counting homework or not counting homework?
Just everything. So you spend during the day studying.
Probably 10 hours?
Studying?
Hours a day?
An hour. Just one?
He said an hour, right?
No, I said 10.
10,
You're-
10 hours.
Hmm.
Wow.
I never have studied like this whole online thing, except for when I really wanted to win a Kahoot.
Do you feel overwhelmed
Yes.
by all the work?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's just too much, or do you feel like you don't know how?
Too much.
For
Too
you?
much, like everything. Like too much homework, too much time in class, everything. Yeah, I have school from 9 to 4, and then I have to go straight to soccer practice. And then after soccer practice, I may be going for like maybe another 30 minutes with my dad. And they give us maybe like 4 hours of homework, so I don't like it at all.
You get to stay up till 12 and wake up at 9.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally like some of
And
those
you gotta
annoying
watch
kids in
Yeah.
school, like always bug you all
And
the
then
time.
you get to go into school until 2 o'clock, and the rest of the day you get to play video games.
I think they're not giving George enough. He has time to play video game all day, and I go out there, I go, did you finish this? Yep, it's turned in. I go, did you finish that? Yep, it's turned in. Why don't they give you more homework? He's like, psh, don't say that, but, I don't know. Maybe they have different teachers, different schools, but I don't think George has enough to do.
Well, yeah, my school, we're not really doing, I have like one online class every week, and that's for Spanish, and it's like really boring. And
One online class? Wow.
yeah, because like not everyone has access to computers, so we can't really do that much online stuff.
At my school, we had a lot more students who needed access to technology. So we had to get devices out to students that didn't have devices at home. Or when we talked, it seemed like your school was also making the same effort to make sure students had devices, but it seemed like more of your students were already had devices and also were connected, right, to Wi-Fi. So we had to do more of like also finding hotspots for students. Just thinking about like equity for students. When students have different needs, you have to do more. And so I think it took us longer to get started.
The struggle in my district was just the size of the district. Each teacher was kind of responsible to make sure that all of their students from one class period, were connected. So that way, like, that would end up like covering all the students.
Not all the kids in our class had printers at home or good Wi-Fi or someone to help them navigate the technology. One of our kids would spend a lot of her days with her grandma, and her grandma, she didn't know how to necessarily mute or unmute on Zoom.
We actually reached out a few times because we said, hey, our son in high school has this Chromebook that, he can use his desktop computer that we have at home. So we'd be happy to give this Chromebook to somebody who needs it. Nobody ever, I reached out at the middle school and the high school, and no one ever took us up on it.
There's more management, there's more bureaucracy when everything's happening virtually. So a lot of it was just staying on top of student issues and assignments and evaluations and all of these things that were now being managed fully virtually.
My students as well were going through tricky times because most of our students come from everywhere in the world. So many of them were not sure about what to do. Within a few weeks, people moved to all different sides of the world. So with many of them being 12 hours apart in different time zones from each other. So it has been a struggle and a real need, I think, to try and respond to different needs, the emotional, the geographical challenges, the need to learn, but also for students to produce their own work. So managing all these and try to be as supportive as possible has been a real challenge.
It's like all of a sudden everyone was a kindergartner again. You know, every teacher was, because nobody had ever done anything like this. You know, all the teachers were completely learning something new. All the principals were, all the district leaders were, and certainly all the kids were. It just took so long to, you know, figure out how to do this, you know, and what's working, what's not working. And, you know, I don't think they figured it all out, but yeah.
If I go this way, you'll see it's like our kitchen. But I have the table here. The lighting is sort of good. I have a semi-calm background. I think I have the Greek mythology family tree up. This is where I did a lot of my remote teaching for the school I work at.
Our elementary school teacher had 26 kids on Zoom quite a bit and was able to keep them engaged, and then would send them into breakout rooms for different things. And then the theater teacher came in and was running theater games. The music teacher was there, and the recorder. And my son hated it. It took a while, too, for her to get it down. Obviously, you know, realizing you can mute every student, and they just pop up. Like, it took a while for all of us to get used to the Zoom. But once she got it going, I think it was good.
Even though as an academic, you often work from home. I think this complete lack of a structured working day makes it all very difficult to contain your work within set time schedules. Most importantly, again, because you have to do the things that you have always doing, but on top of that, you have to learn all these new skills for delivery, teaching, assessing, communicating with your students. All these things are add-ons. It's not that they come on that, you know, magical time that you have beyond the 24 hours. You just fit it, you know, in a working day that is just becomes so elastic and goes to the early day and to all the way to the late evening.
When a student has a question, I want to respond to them, because if, you know, I could see it just being frustrating as students starting an assignment and they can't finish it unless I respond to them. Mm-hmm. And so kids are working at different times. It's not like, okay, they're all working between, you know, 8:30 and 3:30. No, like there's kids working on their assignments at 8 p.m., you know, like at 10 p.m., at, you know, all different times of the day. And so if I see something from a student, I'm not just going to be like, oh, this can wait until tomorrow morning, because, you know, I might not see that assignment if I don't help them right now. So I try to help them when I see an email coming in.
I felt like I was taking more on because I was trying to engage with these students, and I was producing these videos still for a chorus line for my acting classes. I was doing projects, so I never felt any pressure aside from myself. And I think partially because I'm a father as well, and I know what I expect from my children as students. I think I kind of wanted to make sure that I wasn't leaving any other parents high and dry.
I was a little lucky already having, again, done a fair amount of online prep. So if I had suddenly had to do that from scratch, it would have been a lot to deal with. But I dealt with a lot of that heavy lifting, you know, in the year or two prior, so it wasn't too bad.
His school is just incredible. I think they're opening one in California. It's a school for kids with learning differences like ADHD or dyslexia, dysgraphia, and such. I've been so impressed with the way that they've handled this whole thing. He still had interaction with teachers online. His same class schedule, they just didn't go as long. Like they would be in person synchronous for like 15 to 20 minutes, depending on what the kids would need. And then they were also available if you wanted longer times. And then you'd be offline doing independent work or finishing assignments.
The general thing we've heard is that the private schools worked really hard at it and did a really good job. We heard this from people here and people in Northern California who had kids both in private school and public school. The private schools were more nimble, and the kids sat there for 7 hours a day or whatever it was. They sat there in school.
It's been interesting to see the differences that he has been able to do quickly with the private school, and for me to hear the backstory. How are the teachers adjusting? What are they really doing? How well does the administration have a grip on this, and how quickly they moved into online learning compared to the public education, and the drift between them and that space gap? There was a gap. His private school, it's in El Segundo, it only has, it's really small. It's like not yet 300, like it's almost 300 kids, I think. That's what it is. And it's high school, so it's just 9 through 12. So it's a very small school. But it's got a really great socioeconomic diversity. It has a big racial diversity. It has a lot of kids on full scholarships. So there was that nice thing. And they were still within 48 hours able to get every single child who didn't have access to a computer. They were able to get them computers or iPads and make sure that they had internet. We were not, the public school system just wasn't able to work as fast. It took weeks, months, that sort of thing. But I do want to say, and this is where, as frustrated as I was, that I felt that where my children are, I have a 6th grader and I have a 3rd grader, even though they weren't able to get the online program as quickly and get it kind of controlled as effectively as his private school did, they didn't know what they were doing, even though they probably looked like they did. Because I know the back scene, and that's what I think is optics are everything.
We've started using Google Classroom, and we have to learn how to send emails and hand things in, adding attachments and links and stuff, so we weren't very ready for that.
It was pretty hard at the beginning because I didn't have all my books and everything I needed to do, so they would have to put it online, and I don't work really well with computers, so that was another thing that I had to adapt.
Also, there were so many distractions at home. Because usually when you're at school, it's, school environment. People are walking around or, talking in very low voices. But in the house, we have the phones, the beds. So you have the constant temptation of either going to sleep or just watching Netflix. So, yeah, that was difficult too.
It's hard to focus too, I'm sure, for her, where someone's just talking to a screen. I just see doodling a lot.
My challenges have been understanding what the teachers want me to do. So do you want me to do this work? Do you want me to do that work? I don't know exactly what part of the assignment I'm supposed to do, what part of the assignment I'm not supposed to do, how am I supposed to get onto the assignment, that kind of thing.
For math, the teacher would, I think, assign videos to watch that were supposed to teach the lessons, but then those videos didn't always match the online assignments that they were given. And sometimes the online assignments would ask for an answer that was different than the way the teacher had taught it in the class, because the teacher wasn't creating the online assignments. They were provided by some outside organization.
Yeah, there have been some issues with, assigning work with documents that when you try to access them, you can't really access them. So you have to somehow save them in different formats, and then the files get disturbed, and it's kind of a mess. And his teachers don't always have a lot of technical support that they're able to offer for that kind of stuff.
one time my friend was in this Zoom call with the teacher, and the teacher was on mute the whole time, and she didn't know, so she was just like giving the lesson on mute. Like, that's just sad.
We're being provided more and more access to different kind of tools and different kind of learning. But of course, again, because of the situation, you have to learn all these things online. So there's a paradox there. Even if you're offered support, you're still on your own trying to acquire these new skills.
Once we got into it, there were definitely some webinars and things like that to like help. And some of those were useful, and some of those were just, companies that feel like they need to put something out there. But so it was like a mix of stuff that was helpful and not.
Working together in these collaborative art fields there's no way to replicate that via Zoom.
On Canvas, which is like a website that my teachers use, and they would just upload everything, maybe 2 assignments a week. They would upload it all on Monday and expect it by Sunday. So we would have the entire week to work on about 16 assignments because we have 8 classes.
We don't have that many Zoom classes, but we do have a good amount of homework. So the real challenge is just figuring out what to do.
In the beginnings, I had no control over what I did, and got distracted a lot. But now we have this list that I have to write down all the things we do today, and then a checkbox next to it, and then when I start, and then also how much time I am estimating that I'm gonna do, like how long I'm gonna spend on it. And then when I start, I write down the time I start, and then when I finish, I write down the time I finish, and check if I spent longer or less than I expected, and then take the check mark off and write less or more.
The expected time helps them realize, maybe I miscalculated how much I'm gonna be spending on this, or keeping time to see, maybe I lost my focus and I was losing time.
So I have an exact schedule for him of when does he study, when does he play, when does he do his chores, when does he do some reflex math, some reading, so he does all those things. There's plenty of time for him to goof around.
I think a lot of the stress had to do with the pressure of trying to replicate a learning environment that she had at school to our house. So I stopped that and has taken a more chill approach to her doing school online. And that basically looks like she wakes up in the morning, does her chores, and then she writes down a daily schedule based on what the teacher provides her that day. And if she does have questions from that moment all the way to 3 when school's over, she writes it down for me. So I do a hands-off approach where I don't actually interact with any of her schooling until after 3. And then at 3, we go through her schooling and her day. And that kind of lets her have her own time and lets me have my own time, but still touching base. And so nothing really gets neglected, hopefully.
My English and history teacher, she does optional Zooms, but she doesn't do them during her assigned time. She does them during office hours. But right before office hours, I have my elective Zoom, and since my elective is ASB, I can't really, she has it right at the time when we're ending, a little overlapping, so I can't go on both of them, and then the ASB one's mandatory.
The fact that they had this policy that, there was no live synchronous time when students had to be accountable to the class. They said that they had that policy because they couldn't be sure that all students would be able to be there at a certain time. But why couldn't they just actually have a time where you could interact and then record it and post it so that someone could pick it up later? How great would that be for everybody? Even the people that were there, they could come back to it later.
The flaw with their schedule was they told everyone, I might get the courses wrong, but essentially science and English on Monday, Wednesday, history and math on Tuesday, Thursday. But there was no schedule. There was no hard schedule. And it was like, this is a recommendation. From 9 to 10, do math. And then from 11 to 12, do history. Some teachers had maybe 2 Zooms this whole time. And without sticking to that hard schedule, you don't check in. And then when the teacher would set up the schedule, well, think about it. My daughter's in 6th grade. And when her 6th grade science teacher has only this hour or hour and a half chunk, how many 6th grade classes does she teach? If she teaches 4 classes, all those kids are on that Zoom. So whenever my daughter was on a Zoom with one of her teachers, there were kids from all these other classes, kids that she didn't know, kids that she couldn't be, learn from. And she ultimately just sat there, and a lot of times just sat there while the teacher was handling classroom management, because there are now at least 60 kids on a Zoom instead of the normal 20 something in her class.
My math is she kind of groups the whole class into like one big group. So there's no like this level, it's just one big group. So there's not a lot of homework there. And then all that there's homework is humanities, which is like social studies and whatnot. Yeah, today all I had to write was a letter to the new 6th graders. So I'm assuming that they'll give it to them next year.
Over the course of a day, a regular teaching day, I see almost 200 students in my several classes. So that's a lot of students to take to keep track of with distance learning. If I email them and they don't write back, there's nothing I can do about it. If I email their parents and I don't hear anything back, there's not much I can do about it. I had most of my students were trying, but I had, a handful of students, like maybe just 5 or 6 students who, once March 13th, we all went home for shelter in place. I never heard from them again. They never did any work. They never replied to any of my emails, and they never turned anything in. It was just, I don't know, I guess it was just summer break for them or whatever else,
I kind of see an opportunity, not gonna lie. Because, you have, I don't even know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours or something of school. But most of the time you can actually finish it pretty early. So, you can just do stuff that you want. And there's, so much you can do.
She wasn't as proficient at riding a bike until the pandemic, and now she can ride her bike anywhere, which is fantastic, really, really well. So that was a huge accomplishment for us. So bike riding, scooting. We had a neighbor who lives across the street who gave us a key to her backyard, and she would allow us to go into her backyard and let the kids go swimming in her pool. And so we've been swimming a lot, which has been really nice, especially when it's been hot. But the main thing she's done is she's read a lot. I think she's probably read over 20 plus books since this started, and books that are like this thick, which I think is great. Reading for pleasure, picking anything she wants to read and just tearing through it. We've ordered, I think, at least 15 books from Amazon since the pandemic started. So she spends a lot of time reading. I'd say she read more than the average child before, but not like this. She potentially could read somewhere between 3 to 4 hours a day. So I think each kid's different, each kid's different. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she just said she barely read before the pandemic. She wouldn't have much time, maybe 10 to 20 minutes right at night before she went to bed, right? But again, with being on Zoom only about an hour and a half to 2 hours a day, a little bit of homework, and she's very, very independent with her studies, and she just has a lot of time for leisure reading, which is great.
And since I have a Kindle, I read more.
How much are you reading? Do you know?
I read a book a day.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I called Eva. I told her, okay, it's have you done your reading? And it's no, not yet. It's okay, can I go do your reading? And then 10 minutes later, I go into her room and she has the book but then in between the book and her eyes, it's the phone, and it's kind of like, what are you doing?
Problem with this pandemic is I cannot arrange a lot of outside activities for him. You know, I think the way to get kids off is, I don't like telling them you can't, you know, be on your phone. You know, I mean, but what I can do is I can arrange things for him that he can go and do, and then he's not on his phone.
We've been trying to find destinations too, especially when LA was fully shut down. So we found a drive-in, you know, that was about an hour away. So we've been going to drive-in movies where you can socially distance, but be out.
So I've been actually trying to write my own 20-page short novel, which I'm getting close to finishing.
Tell her.
Which I'm getting close to finishing, and if it's relatively grammatically correct and the plot isn't crap, I'm gonna get like a prize.
I've been going out almost every day to play tennis with my friends.
Me and my friends have done like virtual sleepovers, and we've been like texting, sending videos, things like that, FaceTiming, and we've been using House Party, which is just like good because it means you can have like multiple people and like a lot of people, you know.
My kids definitely spent a lot of time being entertained when there wasn't a lot of school. One of the things my middle schooler did was she watched this series called Outer Banks, which made her really want to learn how to surf. So, and there is a surf school that's open this summer. So she's gonna do that for like 3 weeks.
It's hard. That's what I meant. It's like, it's hard to find quality content for her that she finds engaging and it's educational. I mean, there's a handful of shows that we watch together and she likes, like that physical mind games or brain games or something like that, and a few others. But for the most part, it's just, you know, it's TikTok things and see what influencers are doing, and then she gets creative with fashion-related stuff. You know what I mean? It's kind of like doing her own clothes or cutting T-shirts or painting sneakers, things like that. Which to me is great, but I know she's getting most of that from people on TikTok that just kind of like doing that. It's like, oh, I want to have, look what she did with her hair or with her nails or with her clothes or the shoes. And it's just kind of like, okay, it's somewhat creative, but, you know, it's, you know, do find some other things too. I mean, it's kind of like, there's a lot of stuff out there. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. It's the same that there's very, very few well-curated online resources for adults as far as kind of like art and movies and stuff like that. For the kids, it's even worse.
In terms of figuring out what's working instructionally, it was similar because it's completely different teaching students online. We don't know how to do that. I use a lot of talking and small group interactions in my classroom. So I have students just multiple times, you know, like every few minutes actually have a conversation to process this information. And I can't do that, especially with, we didn't do as much synchronous. We did more like asynchronous lessons because it just seemed to work better because students aren't all able to get on at the same time. So not having everyone on at the same time, I had to create lessons where students can work independently from home and then do office hours.
I feel I'm studying better because we have like extra and individual time to talk with the teacher to like understand a few things instead of the whole class there.
My daughter went in once for office hours and she was the only kid there and she just felt really awkward and she was like, I just had one question, but then the teacher kept me there for the whole 30 minutes to just keep going over other things, and so I felt awkward. So then she never went back. There was the teacher trying to help her. That was like my daughter's just awkwardness of how a Zoom meeting is awkward, and not wanting to be in a one-on-one like that with your teacher when you're used to engaging with them in the class of 20.
You know, like high school kids who are sort of, you know, sheep-like, they're not going to go if they don't have to, or go like take a huge amount of initiative to figure out what they might not know they're not learning. I mean, they aren't doing that. So
I have an introvert as a child, and she gets looked over a lot in a physical setting. And now in a digital setting, I feel like not a lot of kids are getting the individual attention that is needed. If there was a way where a teacher can maybe connect with them even once a week, like a one-on-one, and it's not even about an emotional checkup, but more of like do you understand this content? Because my child will not reach out and say she doesn't understand something.
They left us like an open chat for us to be able to text the teacher, but they barely answered, and it wasn't really useful.
And then they also said that we had to like send emails if we had more questions, but I don't know. They don't really like sending emails.
And they never answered, so.
I think our son was really thriving in school on the social element, and that pushed him to learn in other ways that he lost in this. He started like rushing through his work just to get it done, and then he was making mistakes, and then I don't think he could always learn from his mistakes. So I'm interested to see where he'll be next year. And I think he'll be fine, because I think he was in 3rd grade and he did learn new things. Like he learned area and perimeter that he did not know when he left. So I'm like, okay, I can see that in math they're learning new things. And I know they did a whole section on plastics and microplastics, and he learned all about that. And throughout this time, the teacher really talked about the environment. So he knows before this, he was not talking about the environment and how we impact the environment and what choices we should make and how we should change our choices. So those conversations came up during the stay-at-home distance learning, and perimeter and area. He started looking at that and figuring that out. So I know he learned.
I was an assistant teacher this year. The head teacher I work with had Active Inspire. I've been making interactive assignments and screens that I can share. I work with kindergartners, so this was a math patterns example. In Google Draw, I created a number of shapes along the side, and then I think it was 3 different patterns for the kids to pull the shapes and finish the pattern or repeat the pattern. That was actually really, really successful. In this classroom, it was actually pretty high tech. They had a Prometheus touchscreen board that was like a huge screen in front of the classroom instead of a blackboard or a whiteboard. And it was a touch screen, and you could have anything from your computer come up on it. In some ways, technology for them is already something it's an access point for them. They feel comfortable with it, and in some ways it's more comfortable than sitting face to face with someone with autism or next to someone with autism. Can sometimes feel very, like, if they're sensory sensitive, they can be angry if you're too close, or this whole sort of tactile defensiveness thing is broken down with technology.
I teach technology electives, so a lot of the work that they were coding and different things, many of my students were able to just get to work. It was difficult for me because in my classes I try to build community, so they're helping each other. They can't, if they try to, if they rely on me to answer or to help them with all of their questions, we'll never get anywhere, because there's so many questions when they're learning something new, like coding. So, I try to create community so they're helping each other and giving each other feedback. And so that's really difficult with distance learning.
So hard teaching Ione to do stuff. It's so hard relearning stats. It's so hard relearning about the fall of Rome. It's so hard relearning all these things. I love my daughter's teachers and how they have the patience to teach her, because I don't.
I feel like distance learning or homeschooling or all that, inverted classroom. I feel like there's a lot of really good ideas that involve like online education. Like Manish would tell me about how medical school has shifted to inverted classrooms where you listen to the lectures all online before you go to class. Then you go to class, and that's where just only discussion happens. You're expected to have listened to the lecture outside of class. And project-based learning is where you do a lot of investigation on your own about your chosen area of interest, and then you come together to present, and you come together to get support and guidance. So I feel like there's a lot of like good things that could come out of a more hybrid approach to learning that the school might put in place. But they're not doing that. They're really trying to just replicate like this sort of multiple choice exercises and testing and quizzes and maybe watching a lecture. They're not trying to evolve along with the opportunities that the technology provides.
Some of my teachers, I really like how they're doing, like especially math, but my English teacher gives us a lot of busy work that to me is kind of pointless.
My English teacher gives me an essay to write almost every day. It's just terrible.
We're actually doing probably more work because back when you were in school, they'd spend a lot more time explaining it. So here, like, they give you assignments that will take longer to like make up for the missing.
I'm doing algebra right now, and we are like really behind. So I have to learn 3 chapters like right now, sit until June 10th, which is like not fun at all. I'm cramming a lot, and it's just really, really not fun. And in like we're missing a lot. Like I'm not learning to my full potential. I feel like if I was in school, I would be like engaging more with the work and not just like reading it and answering questions and forgetting about it.
It's a lot harder to learn when there's no teachers teaching you. I feel like that's like a lot harder to understand things when there's no professional there.
She's doing the work that they provide, but I don't know if she's actually learning as much as she would if she was in class.
The real challenge, I think, was not having them sort of get lost without that anchor of the classroom every week and showing up and being able to ask questions and be sort of recognized by the professor and to have that connection. I think it's too easy to start just not doing the work and losing track of the term.
For example, for physics, I was calling my professor almost every day. I managed to emulate the relationship I would have otherwise had in person. We had had 2 months together. Like he knew I had these questions and he knew I wanted to understand what was going on. There's some professors that didn't adapt to the online stage. My math professor, I used to have a pretty good relationship with him. He would write his lectures on a piece of paper. He would take a picture of the piece of paper and he would upload that. And then we'd have a test in like 2 or 3 weeks, and that's just how we learned. We didn't have a phone number. He would be very nonchalant on his answers per email. Kind of felt like you were just taking a series of tests to get a grade. And
I much more preferred getting off of the Zoom and giving them a project to work on and then coming back and discussing it, so that the Zoom time wasn't spent with me lecturing or anything like that. It was spent discussing and talking and hanging out while they worked on the projects on their own.
Some classes, it doesn't work in virtual because like PE classes, you can't just do like virtual exercising. It's not a class that's virtual exercising. It's just like study about basketball. You wouldn't normally do that because why would you spend a whole class talking instead of doing exercise in PE?
Now the worst, like when we used to play dodgeball, now it's like exercises, and
never used to do
not good.
dodgeball.
But it's bad. It's mostly bad, but yeah, no, it's all bad.
He plays soccer on a team, and his coaches, they meet, I think, I don't really monitor it too much, but at least 3 to 4 times a week. And they do drills, like probably a lot of calisthenics, a lot of running, but a lot of dribbling and juggling. And it's worked out for him because it's a pretty intense workout, anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, anywhere from a couple to all 16 of them joined by Zoom. His coaches are actually, some are in the US and some are actually in Europe. I think some of them went back to Europe before the pandemic started. So sometimes when he's on Zoom with his coaches, it's daytime here, but nighttime where they're at. And I think they're in Scandinavia, I'm not sure, somewhere in Scandinavia, maybe Sweden. And he goes out in the backyard or the front yard. We also have a park across the street, just a small like patch of land, so he can go out there and play. So I think that's been fantastic for him because I think kids absolutely need physical activity. I think it's important for all humans to be active, and being at home and being sedentary is not good. But playing soccer by yourself is difficult, right? You know, he's not playing on it, he's not part of a team, which I think he probably misses, that interaction and that team sport.
Some of the early data, at least that I've seen from New York, support that the kids who do get sick and actually need hospitalization, but again, don't die. Many of them have had issues with obesity, and so it's an important time in our society. We happen to be, unfortunately, at a time when obesity is an epidemic in children and adults in the United States. And this virus happens to do very well in those people. So we don't want to make things worse.
When you're reading a book, if you don't fully understand the page, but you go on to the next page and you don't fully understand that and you keep going, after a few pages, you're totally lost. You have to understand everything, or you have to go back and figure it out, or ask questions. So if they really dig a deep hole, then it might be difficult for them to express through email how lost that they are, or what they need help with, where they are and where they got stuck or something like that.
I think in the classroom we do so much assessment all the time, just kind of informal, formative assessments where we're checking to see if they're understanding and not waiting until they even get to a point where they have to ask a question. Mm-hmm. So by the time we're ready to have them ask questions, they already have at least some foundational knowledge of what we're trying to teach, because I'll teach them a concept, then I'll have them process it with a partner, and then I'll walk around and see what they've either written or created, or I'll just ask them questions to see if they're getting it. But in a distance learning environment, that's, I think, where there's a learning curve for teachers, is how do we assess students when they're learning and they're not with us? The other thing that I also noticed is some of my students were getting help from their parents. So the work I was seeing, I was like, okay, this doesn't look like you're writing. And so so I had a couple conversations. So much of it was just kind of helping students and families also just get through it emotionally. So I didn't want to make it harder by being like, okay, you can't, so I just let it go. But it's also going to be like, how do we work with parents so they know what's helpful, and then what's just doing the work for their kid, where the kid's not really learning how to write because the parent wrote the essay for the kid,
Jack has dyslexia and a lot of issues writing, but his English assignment was to write, I guess, some sort of story. And so I think it's called COVID-20. That's the name of his story. I did not help him with it, and his teacher called us, and I was like, what's going on? But he actually did write it. He wrote, I think, over 2 pages, single space, which is a huge accomplishment for him. But obviously with dyslexia, the main issue is his grammar and punctuation is off, even with using a computer. So, and that's part of the project, is actually to meet with someone to edit it. But his teacher thought it would be important that the 3 of us meet rather than it just be him and someone else. And then I think he's supposed to present it to us later once it's finished.
They have a focused teacher program, so he has a specific person that he meets with every day who helps him with scheduling, with creating, or helping with social stuff and helping with reading.
The way I do it is, if everything is done that needs to be done, and I check the emails I get from the teachers and I check Elluminate, if everything is done and it's pretty good, I don't even get involved, whatever. When he either doesn't get something done, or he has difficulty, then I'll do it with him. So in the case of math, he needed help with something that I could do, but I didn't have enough time to do it with him because my work is very busy. It's easily 10 hours a day. And so then I have a friend who is actually a high school teacher in a private school. So I just hired him as a tutor, and then, once in a while they just hook up on Zoom like we are or whatever, FaceTime, and they just do together, and he helps him. He makes sure he understands it.
We got to exercise some discipline and some patience and some autonomy, the ability to work independently, right?
Yeah, because if we didn't, I feel like we would go partially insane because of how much together we would have been all the time in quarantine.
I had some students who struggled more in class, and then they actually ended up doing really well online. And it was just being able to learn without the distractions of other students around them, and being able to join me for office hours where maybe it was just more one-on-one attention. Some students were really able to thrive in a distance learning environment, and that was surprising to me. I wasn't expecting that.
So with my younger one, the third grader, who, by the way, hated school since he was 2, and I put him in preschool, he was the kid who cried every day. If he could have gotten back up into my womb, he would have, and I was gross enough, I wanted to let him. Okay. But he always hated school. This was the first year, 3rd grade. His teacher was so incredible. She was funny. She was sarcastic. She was cool. And for the first time, he was lit up. And he loved going. And his best friend happened to be in his class. So this was an amazing year. So when it all got shut down, what was interesting, and I thought his hardest adjustment within the first month was not being able to be a leader in the classroom anymore. That was something that gave him a lot of, he felt really, it stroked his ego, and it gave him a lot of, he felt really good about being he was voted mayor and people really liked him. He even once said to me one day, he goes, we play prisoner and they always pick me. So it must mean they like me. And I think it was his first year of feeling really liked and respected. And he took on this great leadership role. And it was interesting. There was another kid in the class who's a little more socially awkward and introverted and very computery. And what was interesting was that kid hooked into this online learning. It was like we had met him in his playground. And this kid started taking over Zooms and started doing extra Zooms and coordinating and knew how to work this Google Classroom. And my son felt completely snubbed, that he was not this leader and this other kid was taking over. And so it's interesting. I asked my husband, who teaches high school, this is an interesting space that our kid's personality, and he goes, oh my goodness, it's happening on the high school level with his students. The kids that had been introverted and gamers were knowing how to facilitate and really take over this sort of online school setting. And these kids who needed the social leadership interaction in person, these extroverts, were becoming very depressed and sad and withdrawn, and were not able to thrive. So my son has collapsed under this. His teacher's so good that she kind of really kept engaging him, but this was a painful thing. And it was very interesting to see it play out and hear that my husband experienced it with the high school level identically, and that social status and comfort level. It was fascinating.
I absolutely hate it. I've learned that I'm very much an extrovert.
I just wake up and I just like to get it over with at 7 o'clock because it's stressful.
Yeah, I've been really exhausted because I haven't been eating, and then I've been doing a lot of schoolwork, and it's really a vibe.
The camp was canceled, so I don't really know what I'm gonna do this entire summer.
There has been a little change with my mom, and that's only she been really obsessive with cleaning.
Finn is collapsing because he hates the homeschooling. Tegan barely has it, right? It's barely been there. So really she's sitting alone, isolated in a room for 9.5 hours, right? It's terrible. And then by the time I'm now come out, she's glued to the bed. She's sort of morphed into it.
I don't know. I've been kind of sad because my sister's going to college, and that's kind of hard on me. And I feel like now that I have all this like time alone to think and stuff, like it's just getting to me. I don't know. I feel like when I'm alone, I think of like the sad things that I usually put off. So I don't know. But yeah.
It's like sometimes sometimes like it's hard to like socialize like a lot because it's been like sometimes you just want to like be alone for a bit, and also like during this time I just sometimes just feel like it's not really being very good for my mental health, so I don't really like. But I definitely like talk with my parents a lot and like tell them how I'm feeling and see if they can like help me feel better.
I try not to like make others worry about it, so I just like keep it to myself.
Because I'm not quite the person who likes to talk about my feelings a lot. I don't know. I usually only talk about my feelings with my friends.
I don't want them to like if they have stuff to worry about, I don't want them to worry about like my problems and stuff. So I try to just like keep everything to myself.
They're not moving and they're not singing and dancing, or maybe they are sometimes, but it's just like everything that they knew is gone. To me, I feel like there's this void of just sitting in front of a computer. Their psychosocial needs are not necessarily being addressed.
You could see sometimes, on some days, these kids would just be so wiped out and so burnt out, and they didn't want to get out of bed, or they wouldn't even turn on their camera for the meeting.
It's more than just let's get online and learn. It's like you have to take care of life and yourself before you can be present to learn.
People who can get outside more are maybe feeling better. Kids who have their own space to work in or like a quiet place and access to technology have a better time of it than kids who don't, who may be homeless or maybe, in a crowded apartment or without Wi-Fi. And those are the things I feel like that create anxiety and create this inequity, and that's what we really need to address going forward.
We haven't taken our SATs, we haven't taken our ACTs. College application is going to be completely different, and like also we missed half of a semester, so that kind of just put us all behind academically. Do we still have to go into APs? Are we still going to have to go to advanced classes so that our applications look good?
What I also annoyed with the teachers is they were like, well, you're not going to get A's or B's. And that was important to her. And they weren't upgrading the Google or the classroom grades. And because she's an overachiever and needs to see those A's, and they weren't caring about it, but she cared about it, she has meltdowns about not getting enough work, not getting the straight A's, not getting the positive feedback. That's what keeps her going. And I feel like her teachers were kind of like, hey, yeah, don't worry about it. It's fine. You can't say that to someone who doesn't speak that language. She can't not worry about it. So just update your charts. Like at this point, these kids are falling apart. So if one kid says to you, I really need my A to be put it up there. Like give the kid a win. I don't care if you're faking it. It matters to her. It's her emotional health. But as a parent, I have to say, you know what? The teachers are busy, just like your father is. If he doesn't have time to update these grade books, you just have to take him for their word. And her job is to not reach out, but to practice being uncomfortable and feeling okay in this bad, negative space and living through it, living through the discomfort. That's, I feel like, as a parent, this entire 3.5 months has been, how do I live through the most uncomfortable time? And how can I be okay and survive a bad place?
There wasn't a lot of oversight saying, well, this isn't working. We didn't see any mid-flight corrections. We didn't see any acknowledgement from the school district that this is not working. We're going to try this now. None of that. It was just like, oh, well.
My mom, like you know my mom. She's a big news addict. Like she's constantly watching her news, and then sometimes I don't know. She's like starts yelling at her phone or whatever, and then she comes up and starts complaining to me about the news, and then I get freaked out sometimes. But there was like this big thing that happened. I don't know what time, but recently, she didn't try to show it to me, but she was going through Facebook and on the news, and then I saw this photo of this guy who died. There's this big thing. I don't know.
Oh yeah, wasn't he pinned or something by a police
officer? So, and my mom's really upset about that. So
I've heard a lot about that, and that's kind of freaked me out a little.
One thing that I'm encouraging more of is her to actually FaceTime her friends. I'm kind of concerned about her just communicating and being social, which is such a big part of being a preteen.
I do want to see my friends, but it's also just being able to interact with people. Yeah, that's getting that taken away is really making me go insane.
I think you have to be with people face to face, you know, in order to really develop intellectually and morally as a person in the world with other people.
But just in general, like the anxiety levels have been really high. Like I would call us a neurodiverse family with ADHD and dyslexia and anxiety and depression. And so we are, you know, all kind of trying to manage all of those things at the same time. And definitely sleep has been hard for me. I'm perimenopausal, and that has been like, that's just an upheaval in a regular time. But I feel like that's the lens I'm looking through during this whole thing too.
In addition to just the challenges of getting students connected, there's also a lot going on with a lot of our families at our schools. People losing their businesses or people losing their jobs as a result of losing their business or job, also having to worry about immigration issues.
I can't focus. Do we have enough food? What happens if unemployment's supposed to end in July? Then what? Like, oh, great, everything's opening up, but my job's not there. So how am I going to? So there's a lot. So I think as we're going deeper into this, there's even more worry, because I think before it's like, okay, we'll start opening up and everything's going to be normal, and it's not. You know, 50% of the restaurants could be open, or you just drive around the streets and you just can see every business that's been affected and everybody who's been affected.
The schools actually in the UK have been open all this time for two categories of children. Children whose parents are doctors, nurses, or work in supermarkets, or any kind of the professions where they have to go to work. The children have the right to go to school. So key workers children have been going to school all this time. And also the other category is a category of vulnerable children. So children who have already been identified as being at risk of because of various vulnerabilities, and mental health obviously is one of those. But of course, the system is not working that well. And I think many children, either those who already had experienced challenges with mental health, and even more so the new challenges that many children are facing, have not been addressed in any systematic way. And I think this is a challenge for schools when they reopen. How do they create that space for the children, not only to learn, but also to return to that kind of sense of ontological security that they need. And I know that there are discussions within education where some schools or some educators are prioritizing mental health. So the message that they send is that don't worry about the kids going back to learning as soon as possible. Worry about offering those children that mental support that they need. And again, I think for children, even more so than for adults like, you know, our students, I think this should be a priority.
There would be referrals that we make to other people, but as teachers, we also have to, you know, to be like trauma informed in the way that we teach, so that we aren't bringing things up for students in a way that we're not able to hold them in our classroom. So we have to be sensitive to that also.
So what the state says is like, okay, we have the schools open for vulnerable kids. But of course, you know, many vulnerable kids, nobody checks if they go to school anyway. And when it's, you know, not compulsory, they won't go to school. They're completely cut off, you know, because of social distance, nobody can go and visit them at home anymore.
I mean, I think it's great that they're offering it, but then, you know, is there a public service campaign that they could do to reach out and get it out to people, or, you know, and especially if people have never done it before, they don't know. And it's really hard to go to therapy for the first time. You're going to talk to this complete stranger and tell them your problems.
Teletherapy has really worked for me. I had a relationship already with a talk therapist and a medication doctor. We call them feelings doctors around our house. And so I think that can expand, and I think that can expand for kids with the OT and speech and PT. Certainly there are some trade-offs or things that won't work, but I think in a few of the webinars that I've seen are about how to make it work better, and how to make sure that, I don't know, even something as simple, and this would help teachers too, as like putting a square on the floor where you're visible on camera so that you remember to stay within that area if you're up and walking around, or if you're doing an OT or asking the kids to stand up and do a movement break, that they have a very well-defined space that the camera can see, and understanding that helps those kinds of sessions be successful.
One parent yesterday or today posted an article from Forbes magazine that basically said, and I didn't read the whole article, but basically they're saying we don't have to worry about the kids' health, but their mental health. I kind of agree with that and kind of not. First of all, I think when kids have mental problems, I think it's the parents, not the kids, right, for one. But two, to a lot of people, mental health means drugging them. And I think that the drugging that's happening of children with psychotropic drugs is the worst thing that is happening in our society, and it's happening a lot. 20 million children are getting psychotropic drugs every day in this country. So when I see these articles, I go, when people start talking mental health, they start talking, oh, we got to give more drugs, and I think that's a lot more dangerous than COVID-19. They think it's a solution and they give it to their kids. It's not that parents want to do something bad to their children. And in fact, this particular booklet is about how psychiatrists do not actually inform the parents of alternative methods of treating, because there's plenty. In fact, I think a lot of kids just have to get out and play, but, as it may. To me, that's one of the bigger dangers in this particular thing. The psychotropic drugs, like everything else in healthcare in this country, is a business. It is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. $355 billion a year as of 3-4 years ago. That's a lot of money. Okay, these companies market these drugs very, very hard. And this particular time, people go, oh, my kid is so stressed out, it's home all the time. And the next thing you know, somebody goes, oh, I haven't given this drug. Because the guy who prescribes it gets a kickback from the company that makes the drug. And it's much easier than giving, actually helping somebody. You can always just prescribe, write a prescription. So to me, that is a very big danger.
You have heard my daughter talking about your mental health. It's very upsetting, of course, to hear a child talking about how they feel that their mental health has suffered because of the situation. But I think this is the case for most children. So I think it's very important for their mental health, as much as they're learning, to be back to some kind of normality in a learning environment. But absolutely, the fundamental principle, I think, and the same applies to us, and this is what the university promises to us, is that we will return into that physical environment only if we can safeguard everybody's security and well-being.
I think that the public school systems did not have good optics. I don't think that they looked like they were on it. And I want to say that even though maybe the private schools look like they were on it, I'm going to tell you something. Everybody was just as ill-prepared for this as the next guy. That's it. So when people go, God, I can't believe how crappy the online school system was this year. My first thing is, Yeah, that was never something anyone had training for. I will not hold these people accountable to get their act together in 48 hours. And the only reason why those optics for that private school is better is because they had 300 people to figure out. And to roll that out in the difference in 1,000 kids school, it's just not the same. And there are so many more people to please and so many more moving pictures and pieces that we don't understand. And for me, in my head, there's a part of me that goes, look, you either, believe in the program and you opted in a while ago and you were a full supporter of it. If you were on your fence, then this is where you're going to get caught up. I drank the public school juice. So I don't think they did a good job. And guess what? I don't expect them to. And if they can't pull it together over the summer and get it together, then we have a problem. But no one is prepared for a global pandemic and all of the stuff that happens on top of that with race riots. So do I expect them to be any better than this? I really don't. Unfortunately, I think this is absolutely acceptable. And I think that what people don't understand is that all of those administrators and teachers that are supposed to be teaching and figuring out now how to navigate an entire new world, not only did they ever have training for it, okay, it was never put, I am an education major. That is what I have my degree in. Never once when I was at LMU getting a very great education did anyone say, and by the way, in case of a global world pandemic, you ever have to resort to online schooling. And by the way, that didn't even exist when I was in college. They couldn't have even predicted not only a pandemic, but online schooling. I mean, people still had AOL when I was in college. So there was no way they would have been able to even teach it. And guess what? Most teachers are my age. So they weren't taught. Now, in between all this, my husband, who is teaching your children, is also now dealing with his own family, young children who are falling apart. And he's still expected to work 40, 50 hours a week for your children while simultaneously, while his wife is working full time and is now, also 9-10 hours on a computer working a full-time job. So I don't expect anyone to be better than what happened. But I do think that if all of these higher ups and peoples with master's degrees in education, they all need to figure out what needs to happen next. And if they don't have a good game plan, then we have a problem. But I have confidence. I think that there's really smart people in charge and they're going to get it together. And I think they're doing the right thing. They're doing polls, right? They're getting all these surveys. They're asking for feedback. You're going to do this is great. This is exactly what needs to happen is people just need to communicate. They need to get all the ideas and go forward.